A trust is basically a way to kind of protect your assets. It's a way to avoid the whole rigmarole of probate as well as the public scrutiny of probate. If you don't have probate, if you don't have a proper trust, everything you own is going to have to go through the probate court and be public record for everyone to see. So a trust is essentially like a company. So I'm Michael Zwick. I am part owners of a company called Assets International. What belongs to Assets International, I might be part of owner of Assets International, but I don't own Assets International's assets. I own company. The company owns the assets. Same thing with the trust is if you have a trust, everything that is part of the trust is separate from you, which can protect you if it's set up properly. For example, if you get sued, they might not necessarily go after your trust assets. The requires is that you have the trust, like a corporation, has to have the actual title on that. If I can give a little bit of advice,
please
do not go the do-it-yourself route unless you have pretty much nothing in your name. I've seen too many stories of people who said they're going to save themselves a few hundred or even a few $1,000s on doing it themselves, and they might save that money, and then after they're gone, their heirs wind up paying a whole lot more in legal fees and taxes or whatever that they could have avoided had they hired a professional to do it properly.
Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast with Zach Palmer, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that empower you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your health. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Today's guest has built a career out of solving mysteries most of us never even realize exist until we're suddenly at the center of one. Michael Zwick, better known as the Probate PI, helps executors, attorneys, and heirs locate missing inheritance assets and uncover what the deceased left behind. As the founder of Inherit More and a key player at Assets International, Michael leads a licensed private investigation team that specializes in turning legal chaos into clear, claimable legacy. But this isn't your typical legal expert. Michael's part attorney, part detective, and part modern-day treasure hunter, fueled by a lifelong love for solving puzzles from Encyclopedia Brown to Indiana Jones. What started as a fascination with uncovering hidden value has become a mission to help families secure what's rightfully theirs. If you've ever been responsible for settling an estate or want to hear the untold stories behind what's really happening after the reading of the will, this episode is going to be one that you won't want to forget. Michael, welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast. I'm excited to have you here, my friend.
Thank you, Zach. Great to
Absolutely. Be here. Excellent. Well, I always like to start with this question because I think it reveals a lot about who someone really is. What does growth mean to you right now in this season of your life?
So, great question. I am 54 years old, to give a little bit of context. So I guess you could say I like to think I'm in the prime of I have I'm happily married, 3 teenagers. So my kids are, still here in the nest, but also they're starting to look out to what's next in life. And that's obviously a big thing in my life personally. Professionally, I look at it the same way as my company, Assets International, which you mentioned before, is the parent company. Inherit More is a subsidiary. And we started that 24 years ago, just a few weeks ago, had our anniversary. Like my kids, I like to think that it's doing great. Everything's awesome, but there's still so much more out there for us to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am. Yeah. And I'd like to think that both I and my company have a lot more years ahead of us.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on 24 years, did you say?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. As we know, statistically, you're well beyond the odds. So it sounds like you're making a massive impact, and that's what I love to hear. I'm curious, was your entry into this world, the world of probate and legal, was it driven by a painful experience that you went through? Was it just a fascination with legal? How did this, all come about for you? How did you end up here 24 years later? Maybe how'd you start there 24 years ago?
So prior to 24 years ago, I was practicing law. I started in the mid 90s with a big firm in Detroit, which is where I'm originally from. I worked there for a while, got laid off, which was a best decision I never got to make for myself, where I just wasn't happy. It wasn't a great situation. I always, wanted to work for myself. I got laid off, started my own practice. While I was looking at it, got to a point where I stopped looking because I was doing enough work on my own, and I was happy with what I was doing. I was doing nothing to do with probate whatsoever. It was all just criminal defense, civil litigation, some bankruptcy. That's all I was doing. Then in about 2001, an old friend of mine reached out to me regarding this whole issue that there's money just sitting there in government treasuries, what's called unclaimed property, assets that are dormant, like bank accounts, stock, insurance policies, whatever. And after a certain period of time, if it's just sitting there untouched, whoever's sitting on that asset, like the bank or the insurance company, has turned over to the state to hold for people. And there are literally, just in terms of what the states are holding now today, is probably about 90 to 100 billion dollars. It's just sitting there waiting to be claimed. Now, there was obviously a little less back then. And there's so much money now. My general philosophical view is I like to help people, and I'd like to get them what is theirs, including their money. So we started a little side business, first dealing with unclaimed property, which we still do today, of finding unclaimed property and getting it to the owners. And then we realized that there was the same skill set of finding people who have money coming to them applies also in probate, where someone dies and nobody knows who the heirs are, or there are specific heirs who just can't be found. And there's money just sitting out there for these heirs, waiting for them, and they just don't know about it, and they could be anywhere in the world. So we expanded into that. And so doing, came to realize also what a complicated, messy, burdensome thing probate can be. If I can digress a little, I was talking to a friend of mine in Detroit who's the rabbi of a large congregation, and he was telling me that when his father passed away, he says, as a pastor, someone who's pastored people, who's counseled people through major life events, when my father died, it hurts, but intellectually, I was able to process that pain. He says, nothing prepared me for probate. He says, I had no idea what a time and emotion suck that process was going to be. And one of the biggest challenges was finding where all the assets were, and then dealing with the banks and the insurance companies or whatever, who don't always make it so easy for you to get those assets transferred out. Now, given our experience of dealing with unclaimed property, my company, my team and I, we had a pretty good background and knowledge of where assets tend to be when somebody passes away, as well as a very undervalued skill set of how to deal with bureaucracy without just totally losing your leap when they give you the runaround. And fortunately, I have a great team that has been doing this for years and knows how to deal with all the red tape and bureaucracy. So we started another service, which is to find assets for people where someone has died and taken with them the information about what they own to the grave, to find those assets and to get them turned over to the heirs.
Wow. That's a pretty remarkable journey. And I love to highlight that so often in life, when we're open and receptive to those moments that could be perceived as one of our greatest challenges, they're more often than not that slingshot to our next level of life fulfillment experience. Like for you, when you were, laid off from a particular role. And I mean, you were unhappy there anyway, but the irony is most people repeat the same mistake. They're like, I'm miserable. I'm going to go find another job. Maybe it'll be better. Grass is green on the other side, versus having that entrepreneurial spirit and going, look, there's just as much risk in working for someone else as there is working for myself. So why not go do something I'm going to really love and enjoy?
Even more so, if I may, when you work for someone else, you don't own that when all is said and done, and it's up to you to obviously save your money wisely, invest it wisely. But when you're working for yourself, you also have a business that at some point you hopefully can sell and make something out of it. And also there's also just the general idea when you're the boss, you're the entrepreneur, like you get to kind of make the rules.
Yeah. For better or for worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. No, that's 100% true. And you're right. I mean, you're building an asset, right? I mean, it's a very big difference. I mean, and particularly in today's world, it's not like it was, 50 plus years ago. We don't really have anywhere near the commonality of pensions and retirement funds and things like that used to be supported in business. So it's more important than ever to be building things for ourselves. I'm curious, for you, as far as your client base goes, this is such a fascinating subject to me because, as I mentioned to you before we hopped on, my fiance's family just went through a probably not too unfamiliar or uncommon situation, but I've seen this drag out for, I don't even remember how long it's been at this point, probably a year and a half plus. Not to mention the conflict that it's created in the family, which I did not anticipate with a very close Italian family, although they are Italian, so maybe I should have, who knows. But
stereotype.
Yeah, right. Well, they fit a lot of them. And I love
all of your Italian listenership just clicked off.
Yeah, exactly. I think they can relate, is the irony. But what I'm curious about is did I hear correctly that some of this work you guys are doing proactive, like you're not being contracted, you realize that there are these assets and you guys are proactively going out finding them and then trying to find the appropriate persons they belong to? So it's not like I'm coming to you and saying, hey, we just lost this loved one and we have no idea where the assets are. Tell me, go dive into that a little bit more about the different types of people that come to you, when and why.
Okay, so in the context of assets that are sitting in government treasuries, which is not just unclaimed property held by state treasurers, but also other assets in government accounts. It could be uncashed checks sitting on government, that the government has issued. It could be money left over after foreclosure, where there's a surplus after the auction that gets turned over to the county. So in all those cases, we're using Freedom of Information Act to get these lists of money, and then we go do our research to find the owners, or in many cases, the owners' heirs, or if it's a company, who the company it is. And we go to them, and basically the basic concept is we'll go to them and say, hey, Zach, great news. We found money for you. In exchange for a percentage, we'll tell you where it is and we'll do all the legwork to get it for you. Same thing with probate cases, with missing heir cases, where someone, again, dies with either no known heirs or heirs that just can't be found. Those come often usually from attorneys who are handling estates, or the trustee or the executor will call us and say, hey, I'm handling a estate and I can't find this person. Great example, got a call from an attorney in Detroit the other day who's handling an estate where the guy died something like 50 years ago, but the trust was set up so that the then living heirs will get some sort of monthly amount over and for the rest of their lives. And when the last of those dies, then the principal of the trust gets distributed to the heirs, but who were not yet in existence when the guy died. Meaning now all of a sudden, the bank that's the trustee for this trust is simply like, okay, wait a minute. Every single person that we have to find was not alive when the person died, and we have no idea who it is. So they turn to us to identify and to find all of these people, and obviously give them the good news that they're going to get this inheritance from someone that was not even that died before they even were born.
And I hope they heard some stories about grandpa or grandma that were.
Well, if I understand correctly, I think the person actually did not have children. Oh. So they're all like, it's great nephews and nieces. Then to answer your question, in terms of the other work where we're flipping and we're find the assets, that again can come from attorneys, as well as people who are acting as executors, who, like my friend who I mentioned before, who he went through that process before we started that service, where someone dies and and the heirs don't know where the assets are. So we'll get calls from people all over the place saying, hey, I'm handling this estate, I don't know what the person owns. Can you do an asset search? And in that case, we not only will look to find the assets, but also we'll do all the legwork to get those assets transferred over to the heirs.
Hmm. I've got one question I want to go back to in relationship to auctions. But before we do, as you just touched on this, um, it, when you talk about the legal process, how long? Because we've all heard the horror stories, right? I mean, how long is it on average? Is there an average that, um, let's just assume that the assets have been found, but now you're in the process of probate. Are you usually talking months, years, decade before anybody has access to those resources, or what does that typically look like?
The answer is it depends.
Yeah, I
There are
figured.
a lot of factors.
Yeah.
First factor is not only is what state, the state and county it's in. Some states have different states have different processes and deadlines and time frames. First of all, they want to give creditors the opportunity to file their claims. So there's usually a certain amount of time. It varies from county to county. So in California, for example, a probate going through Los Angeles is going to take a lot longer than one in, Riverside County.
Yeah.
Each county is different. It depends on the backlog and whatever else. A big factor is also whether there is, house or other sort of real estate involved in the estate. If it has to be sold, has to be approval. Another factor, going back to what we were touching before, is everybody getting along? If everyone's getting along, things can go a whole lot smoother. If not, that can tie things up for years. And that could be, the case that I mentioned, this case I just mentioned, where, if you have a will, there could be terms in there that say they don't want it getting paid out for certain, they want to spread the payments spread out over time. So there are a whole lot of factors that come into play. Also, the value of the estate. So a lot of states have a process set up where if the estates, meaning the assets that are being administered, are below a certain value, there's a much more streamlined process to go through where it's a lot less paperwork. You just submit it, they rubber stamp it, and you're on your way. Whereas if it's over a certain amount, then they have to appoint an executor, and the executive has to give an accounting, get waivers. It's a whole much longer process, and that threshold for those states that have it varies from state to state.
Yeah, I have to imagine. So that's really interesting. I mean, you've got to be well versed not only in federal law, but then each individual state's law, and then each individual county's law within the states.
Right. So, we don't handle the administration of the estate, but because the work I do we're getting from all over the country, and we also review a lot of probate documents in our research. We have become, if I may say so, quite knowledgeable about a lot of different states and differences within states. Now, there are some states we have very little experience with, so I can't say I know all 50 states and all 4,000 or so counties. Some I know just better than others.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I mean, you're going to have patterns. I have to imagine. I mean, at least I know how things tend to go. It's like of all 50 states, you'll have 5 in a week from California for whatever reason, and Murphy's Law, right? So you mentioned like the hard assets and larger value, like homes, are going to be the times when things get a little bit more complicated and convoluted. The timelines start to expand. The other thing that I'm curious about is, I just keep thinking back to this recent family scenario. I mean, you've got 4 sisters, the oldest of which was appointed as the executor of the estate. You've got 2 wills that are complementary yet somewhat contradictory, and then a trust in addition. And it was just, I mean, I remember reading through the documents many, many times, and I consider myself a pretty darn smart person. And I'm going, this is going to be a freaking nightmare for somebody to work through this process. And then you've got one that doesn't agree with the other 3, nor with the executor. And, the last thing you want to see is a legal battle within a family. But, sometimes people are just on different pages. Like, how much weight does that carry? I mean, if you've already got the trust, if you already have the wills, if you already have an assigned executor, and there was even a really unique clause where it said, if you 4 are not getting along, i.e. if the sisters are not getting along, then the oldest sister gets to decide if anybody is removed from the will.
I would actually say that is an awful clause, if I may say so.
I thought the same thing. I'm like, that is a crazy burden.
You want to take away as much
Subjectivity.
discretion as possible.
Yeah.
That is so subjective of a factor, and almost will certainly lead to expensive and protracted litigation if she actually exercises that clause.
Yeah. She hadn't, there was still just, even though it was relatively black and white, I mean, clear as to who was going to be receiving what. And it was very balanced too, from everything that I saw. Yeah. There was, for some reason, just differences of opinion on the value of certain things. And, I just find it, but that's a great tip. So, I mean, I hope everybody takes that away, is if you guys are, setting up a trust and a will, make sure that it is as black and white binary as possible, so that you aren't placing that burden of discernment and subjectivity and discretion on, one person, because
right. I would say, especially when it comes to tangible items, anything that, you think like jewelry, artwork, stuff like that, where, well, and I know from my own family, there are cases where people fight over who's not going to get it because nobody wants it. But at the same time, you have cases where people will fight, spend much more in attorney fees, not to mention the psychological strain, fighting over stuff that's just not worth that much. Yeah, we're talking about, you might have a ring that is worth, say, $5,000, which is expensive for most people for jewelry, but you can't divide up that ring, unless everybody wants a piece, and then they somehow incorporate it into something else. And people, and the attorney fees, I can guarantee you, before you even get started, will be well over that. To really lay out exactly who is getting what, and not just say the executor is going to decide who gets which for jewelry, or it can get really ugly over stupid things.
Jeweler's another great example, because that was another problem too. I mean, when grandma passed away, Nana, I mean, the jewelry was left to the grandkids, but again, there was not a specific allocation. So then now you've got a whole different argument. And then, of course, some of the sisters were like, well, that one really means a lot to me. The kids aren't going to take it. I'm like, oh, Lord, you guys, right. such a mess. One thing I'd like to take a step back to is, you mentioned auctions. And if you could help me understand this from this frame, my limited understanding of the, actually, I'm not even sure the name of the process, but where my brain immediately went was, if you have a homeowner that passes away and the home's paid in full, but now you've got unpaid and unclaimed property taxes, there's the lien placed against the house, now you have an auction for those liens. Are the auctions for these unclaimed assets the same type of thing that are being run by that local county? Is this a separate system altogether? Is there something different for hard assets? Because you also mentioned, I believe, that the cash can even go to auction. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
So if a property goes into foreclosure for failure to pay any sort of lien, debt tied to lien, so you're talking property taxes, but also it could be, the mortgage, it can be homeowners association or condo fees. So whoever is owed that money, if there is a delinquency after a certain period of time, that party can then file for foreclosure action. So this actually touched on a very, very big issue that came up before the United States Supreme Court recently. So when it came to foreclosures being done by banks or by homeowner association or condo associations, the general rule of thumb across the country is that if the property sells for more than is owed, then the balance goes to the homeowner. So give you an example, just say you owe $100,000 on your mortgage and you default on that mortgage and it goes to auction, and that house sells for $175,000. You got extra. The bank gets its $100,000. That extra $75,000 goes to you.
But you have to go claim it, right?
What was that?
But you have to go claim it, right?
You have to go claim it. Yeah. So the issue that came up recently for the Supreme Court about 2 years ago is regarding taxes, because a lot of states have written into the law that if someone defaults on taxes and the county steps in and forecloses on it, the county becomes the owner and then forecloses, and therefore the county gets the anything left over. So there was a case out of Minnesota called Tyler v. Hennepin County, where this woman went and there was about $50,000 more paid at auction than what she owed to the county. And the county said, well, it's ours. And she says, no, I want my $50,000. So it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in her favor. I believe it was a unanimous decision, and said, no, it is unconstitutional for the county or any taxing authority to keep that excess funds. The equity, which is basically what it is, belongs to the homeowner. Right. In the context of probate, there's a general rule in probate that when someone dies and an estate is open and the court is appointed someone to be the executor kind of steps into the shoe. The estate takes the place of that person, and the executor has all the authority to do this. So if someone had a house and it was all paid up, going back to your hypothetical, mm-hmm. and no taxes were paid, so we see it all the time because the person died and nobody thinks, oh, I got to make sure to pay the taxes on that to keep the house in good standing with the county, and the house goes to auction. If there is first of all, the family or the executor can step in before it goes to auction and pay back the taxes and keep the house in good standing in the name of the deceased until the property can be transferred to whoever is going to be inheriting it, or if they're selling it. If the auction has happened and it's too late to save it from that, then any sort of surplus that is left over goes to the estate, and the executor of the estate can claim it, and it goes into all the other assets that go to the heirs. I hope I explained that well.
No, you did. I'm trying to think of how to what to exactly to extract from that. I mean, it rung so many different bells.
The thing I say to extract is if a house is lost in foreclosure, mm-hmm. There still might be money out there. So if someone, and that's the overage, is that what it's commonly referred to? Overage or surplus. Those are okay. So mm-hmm. if you find out that the deceased in a probate proceeding owned the property and went into foreclosure, don't just give up hope. There still might be money out there. You might have to do a little digging, and depending. Again, from state to state, it varies as to where that money goes. But the money there should be money there.
Mm-hmm. Now, how does
surplus? Now, a lot of times a house only doesn't sell for beyond what is owed, and there is no extra money. So obviously but at least it bears looking into.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine. I mean, from my brief introduction and experience to that business and industry, I mean, it's another form of real estate acquisition, as we know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's generally the reason that you're looking to bid at auction, is because you're hoping to acquire something for significantly below the actual retail right. value. When it comes to this process, like what I'm trying to think about more is, again, the auction process, like, what about different lien positions? So, like, if I'm not mistaken, the tax lien as example is a first lien position, but can't that wipe out the other lien holders in certain instances? Like, how do those type of scenarios play into that, or does it in this particular case?
So again, it really varies from state to state. I hate to sound like I keep waffling on things, but
no, it's true though.
So in some states, I'll give you an example. In Ohio, for example, mm-hmm. Anybody who's going to foreclose, including the county, brings a court action, and they have to name all the people all the parties that might have an interest in the property, including other creditors. Mm-hmm. The other creditors, not only is their lien wiped out, but if it gets sold at auction, but also in order to preserve any right to the surplus, because yes, there are positions of priority. So just say, for example, in Ohio, a county files for foreclosure on for taxes, and there's a mortgage on the property. So, and then there's the property owner, just to keep it simple like that. So the mortgage company, the mortgage company has the right to file an answer and say, they can't stop the foreclosure, but what they can say is, hey, anything that's left over after the sale, any surplus or overage, we get that. We have priority as them. But in Ohio, if they don't file an answer and then it goes to sale, it's too late for the bank to step in and say, hey, they're done. They are wiped out. In other states, they still can do. They're not barred by that. They can still file a claim. It's not too late for them.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating.
And that can go for also, if there's any judgment creditors. We had a case out of New York a few years ago where there was a surplus and guy lost the house in a mortgage foreclosure, and we found that the Amtrak, the train had a sizable judgment against the owner. So we actually went to Amtrak and we said, hey, that judgment you got against John Doe, we can help you collect on it. And they said, great. So we went and they signed it. And then so we filed on behalf of Amtrak, or we had a lawyer file on behalf of Amtrak a claim to that money. So it varies from state to state as to who can jump in and what they have to do to preserve their rights and priority. But generally speaking, though, yes, if a lien that's tied to property, the lien is wiped out. Now, whether that creditor can still go after them as what's called an unsecured creditor, if you want me to explain that, I can. They can still do that in some states. Still go after the debtor for that, but usually they kind of, most large institutions will just write it off at that point.
That's actually one thing I'm really curious about is, we're talking about the one end of the spectrum where people have assets to pursue, which I assume is the majority of your time and effort. But what about the other end? What about when people leave debt? Is that wiped out? Is that going to be passed on to the next generation of kids and family? Like, what does that look like? I've always been curious about that and never really been clear.
So in bankruptcy, in probate, just like in a foreclosure, there is priority. So the first priority actually is reimbursement for funeral expenses. That's usually number one. Next is the attorney. Wow. The attorney and probate costs and stuff, and the costs directly related to the probate estate, services for the probate. Then come creditors, and then within those creditors, there is priority. I think, like the IRS, obviously, is and the state tax authorities are going to be higher up. So, if you have an estate where the creditors are owed more than the assets that belong to the deceased, then it's underwater, just like if you own a house where the mortgage is for more than the value of the house. And like with those underwater houses, some people will just walk away and go, you know what, forget it, I'm not going to bother with the probate. Why should I spend all that time? I'm not inheriting anything anyways. There are ways around it. First of all, some creditors will file their claim, but they won't actually pursue it if you push back a little bit, because it's just not worth their while. They just kind of
file the claim against the kids or grandkids or whomever.
No, so a debt is only good against the person who actually took out the debt. So just like an example, John Smith dies owing, has a credit card bills of $100,000, and they're only in his name, and he's not married. He dies. He's 3 kids. If there's nothing in the estate to pay off those claims, then the credit card company is just out of luck. They cannot go after the kids. Now, if though there were, say, $200,000 in assets, assuming there are no other debts to be paid, they get their first $100,000 before the kids get anything. Now, of course, if somebody has signed as a cosigner, that's a different story. If someone is a cosigner or guarantor on a loan, they still owe that, even if the primary person has passed away.
Okay, that makes complete sense. What I'm curious about is if you had to share, a few critical tips or strategies. And I always like to think of it from a Wayne Gretzky perspective, right? It's like, what made Wayne great? He didn't skate to where the puck is. He skated to where the puck is going. And, while it feels morbid to, think about our impending passing or that of our parents or grandparents, there's also a lot of headaches that it can save. So from both an anticipatory standpoint and potential reactive standpoint, I mean, do you have a handful of tips or strategies for the listeners that would help set them up for success if they're nearing that stage of life themselves or have family members that are, and helping encourage them to take the appropriate steps to protect the assets?
Well, you're asking me to tell them what to do so they don't have to use me. No, just kidding. What I would say,
I figured to paint that picture, they need you even more.
Exactly. Now, what I'd say to do, key things in terms of assets, I would say very important to have an inventory of assets that is available to whoever is going to be handling your affairs after you shuffle off this mortal coil. You don't have to give value, like how much your brokerage account or your checking account is worth, but at least know where it is, and update that on a regular basis. Same thing goes for access to any sort of online accounts, like your email, stuff like that, because this way the family can kind of get access to your email to notify creditors, cancel subscriptions, stuff like that. So again, you don't have to give them the keys now, just make sure they know where things are for when the time comes. Same thing for beneficiary, who's going to be inheriting from you, is be kind of specific about who people are. If you're leaving we had a case out of San Francisco, I think it was a number of years ago, where a guy died and all he did was give a name of somebody. And I think he said it was like, a guy who lived in my apartment building. Like, that was all it was. He had no current address. And we were able to track down, it was, they lived in the apartment building. They became friends through being neighbors. And the guy moved to Topeka, Kansas. And we were able to track him down. And he was able to get this inheritance that his friend had left him. So that's something I would say also is leave as much information behind as possible about, where things are, who and where people are, and make things a whole lot easier.
And is there a best practice in terms of place to do that? I mean, I have to imagine that, writing it on a sticky note and sticking it in your safe or something isn't necessarily the wisest. Is that where utilizing you for building a really thorough and thoughtful will comes into play? And I'd also love if you could expand upon, while you answer that question, some of the mystery, I believe, for many people about the synergy between a trust and a will and how they work independently and together.
Okay, so the second part of that could be a little complicated. So which one do you want me to answer first?
Whichever feels right.
Okay, so a trust is basically a way to kind of protect your assets. It's a way to avoid the whole rigmarole of probate, as well as the public scrutiny of probate. If you don't have probate, if you don't have a proper trust, everything you own is going to have to go through the probate court and be public record for everyone to see what you own, who you decide to leave stuff to. Trusts, generally speaking, are not going through the court proceeding and not public record. So a trust is essentially like a company. So I'm Michael Zwick. I am part owners of a company called Assets International. What belongs to Assets International, I might be part of owner of Assets International, but I don't own Assets International's assets. I own company. The company owns the assets. Same thing with the trust. Is if you have a trust, everything that is part of the trust is separate from you, which can protect you if it's set up properly. For example, if you get sued, they might not necessarily go after your trust assets. The requires is that you have the trust, like a corporation, has to have the actual title. So, for example, if you want your house to be in a trust, you have to, if you already own your house, you have to create a deed that says, I, Zach Palmer, am giving this house to the Zach Palmer Trust. You are no longer the owner. The trust is the owner, and the trust will lay out who gets what. Usually there will be a trigger event written into the trust, such as your passing, and says that my passing, this is how I want my assets distributed. Mm-hmm. Most people will have what's called a most people who have a trust will have what's called pour over will, which says anything I didn't already put into the trust should go into the trust. So this way you don't have to have it administered separately.
Mm.
So, that there are benefits to trust. Not everybody needs a trust, but that there are people who do and don't realize it. I'm definitely not giving any sort of legal advice here. I would
Yes.
say if you don't have an estate plan, talk to estate planning attorney, a good one, and they can probably tell you, set you up with the documents you need. I would say on that, if I can give a little bit of advice,
Please.
do not go the do-it-yourself route, unless you have pretty much nothing in your name. I've seen too many stories of people who said they're going to save themselves a few hundred or even a few $1,000s on doing it themselves, and they might save that money, and then after they're gone, their heirs wind up paying a whole lot more in legal fees and taxes or whatever that they could have avoided had they hired a professional to do it properly.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that starts with the trust.
So again, not everybody needs a trust. I would say.
Right. Is there like a benchmark in terms of number of assets, value of assets, relative, at what point does a trust start to make sense, if there's a way to loosely define the?
I frankly, I'm not the person to answer that question.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I know, I see most my work is after the person has died. I know enough about estate planning to be dangerous and to know not to do so as estate plan, and especially that's a very too general of a question.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Okay, cool. So, I want to wrap this up by highlighting, 3 big takeaways I had from you. One, you mentioned in the beginning, like states are holding on anywhere from 90 to $100 billion in unclaimed property. So there's a lot of unclaimed property sitting out there. And is the majority of that from people, are they aware or unaware that those assets are sitting out there? Are they in the process of finding them? Are you in the process of finding them and finding the person that owns them? Like, what does that look like?
Well, in terms of smaller amounts, other than small amounts, most people are not aware that it's there. Small amount. My daughter, who just turned 18 a few years ago, she helped out a friend of ours who was doing her PhD, and she needed to do some testing. So my daughter did it. She got a check for $50. My daughter's put in a bank account, just sat there at the bank at some point because it was unclaimed, got turned over. We always knew where the money was. We knew when it was a bank, and when the bank closed it went to state. We just haven't gotten around to claiming it, which I know is bad advertising for myself. But larger amounts, oftentimes, it's not that often that we find unclaimed property for somebody who is alive. Usually, if for an individual, it's either they never told somebody about it, or sometimes they just didn't know about it. Sometimes we've seen many cases where somebody will buy stock or have a bank account and list somebody else as a beneficiary on that asset and never bother to tell them. We've seen it with, not just like parents to children, but we had a case with an elderly woman who lived in Rochester, New York, her entire life, and we found money for her in Michigan. And turns out it was her stepsister from when they were kids, and they always just kind of kept in touch. And the stepsister never told her that she was putting her on as a joint owner or beneficiary on a bank account, and she got $20,000. What I would recommend is people, check out the unclaimed property division for any state where they have lived or worked, including where they might have gone to school, and see it's out there. A tip I would give to people is some state unclaimed property divisions do take serious the purpose of the whole program, which is to get people their money. Some states are much more protective, shall we say. They have their motives for keeping the money, and they don't want to pay it. So don't give up. A lot of times they'll throw red tape at you. We get case of calls quite often from people who say, I'm trying to get this money and the state won't pay me, and we'll take a look at it. And with our experience, we'll say, oh, this is how you get around it. And this is what you need to give them and whatever else. And you got to push back against them because they are not always going to pay it so easily.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you for those tips. And going back to my recap, I mean, now I've got a couple more takeaways. But one, there's a lot of money that's being that's unclaimed, sitting amongst the states. Two, leverage the power of anticipation. We need to take inventory of our assets, make sure that we assign specific beneficiaries, and leave clear information as to who gets what and when. So make it as black and white as possible. And then I love what you just said too about checking unclaimed property in any of the states that you've lived. That in and of itself is a really, really powerful tip. And I'm just going to say, I think it's really wise to hire a professional. Work with a legal professional to make sure you cross all your T's, dot all your I's. But in your particular case, there's tons of different opportunities to uncover assets you may not even have known existed, as well as helping you navigate a very complicated legal process. So the thought to me of trying to navigate these scenarios on my own seems extremely daunting. So, I mean, I love this from two perspectives. Is one, my parents are aging, and I know they probably haven't updated their will in God knows how long, and let alone created a trust. So I get to give them a little metaphorical kick in the butt, and also lean into the wisdom of not trying to do it on their own, which I know my dad's habits of thinking he can handle it all. So that's a really brilliant takeaways. Now, Tad, one question I'd love to ask: when someone reflects on your leadership and legacy 20 years from now, what do you hope they would say you stood for?
Help. That's what I'm a big believer in, trying to help others. Whether my company is based on helping people get their money. I'm a big believer in just trying to help people, connecting people with resources, whether it's other people or whatever else that they can accomplish what they need to accomplish. Mm-hmm. My wife jokes that I always know people wherever I go, and I know people like you. I always know a guy for whatever, and so I'm like, right before a call, I got a connection request. I got a message on LinkedIn from somebody saying, "Hey, do you know an attorney in Palm Beach County to handle probate estate?" I go, "Sure, I do." Yeah. And boom, the introduction's made. Because I love being able to help out like that and connect people so everybody can thrive.
No, I appreciate that, Michael. The being a super connector is a superpower, and I think it also speaks to what I'm hearing from you is that Michael Zwick looks at himself as a servant leader. And those are the type of people that I love to be around. They're making a big impact in the world, and I think that's an outstanding legacy. So, I want to thank our audience. Thank you for spending your time with us on the Perpetual Growth Podcast, and a big shout out to Michael Zwick for bringing so much value to today's conversation. Michael, where can our listeners connect with you or learn more about what you're doing? Is there any particular resources that you'd like to send them to, or what's the best way to get in touch if they could use support?
So my company is Assets International. So our website is assetsinternational.com. I'm also very easy to find on LinkedIn. I must have been the first Michael Zwick to get on there, and I'm very active on there. So my if you just do Michael Zwick, I think it's linkedin.com/Michael Zwick is my URL for my page. I'm very active on there. I'm very accessible. I accept pretty much any connection request, unless it's no offense to you Bitcoin people, please don't. But the rest of you, send me a connection request. I'll gladly accept. I'll gladly take time if you have any questions to answer them.
Awesome, Michael. I appreciate that. Well, we'll make sure that we include those links in the show notes. You guys can find Michael on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/Michael Zwick, and of course through their website. So we'll make sure that's quick and easy for you guys to find below. Now, if this episode sparks something for you, don't keep it to yourself. Be sure to share it, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and help us reach even more people on their growth journey. And remember, growth doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. We'll see you next time.